It's like every time you turn around, there's a new headline about some big data breach,
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if anything is actually secure anymore.
Right. And it seems like these days, it always comes back to the same culprit.
Let me guess. Those pesky passwords again.
Bingo. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a document from a company, Recordia, and they're all about tackling that very issue. How to make employee access to sensitive data more secure in a world where passwords just don't seem to cut it anymore.
Okay, so let's talk about that. This document, it's from Concordia, right? And they're focusing on employee access specifically.
Yeah, they're really honing in on the security challenges businesses face, especially with all this remote work and everything needing a login these days.
Which, let's be real, can be a lot to keep track of. I know I've had my share of forgot password moments.
Oh, tell me about it. But it's more than just a minor inconvenience, right? This document highlights that a staggering 95% of security incidents involve compromised user credentials. It's like the weakest link in the chain.
95%, that's insane. Okay, so they're saying almost all data breaches tie back to weak or stolen passwords.
Pretty much. And they back it up with some pretty eye-opening examples. Like, remember that massive password leak back in July?
Wait, which one? There seem to have been so many lately.
This one was huge, like 10 billion with a B. Passwords were just dumped online.
Oh, see, that's what I mean. It's like, how are you even supposed to keep up with that? 10 billion, that's...
Mind-boggling. It really underscores their point about passwords being a major vulnerability.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. Why are passwords such a weak link? We've been using them forever.
Well, for one, people are creatures of habit. How many of us use the same password for multiple accounts? Or worse, write them down on sticky notes.
Okay, guilty as charged on the reusing passwords thing, but come on, sticky notes, really?
You'd be surprised. But the document also calls out this other sneaky thing called buddy punching as a major security gap.
Buddy punching.
Yeah.
That sounds oddly wholesome, like a friendly fist bump at work or something.
Not quite. It's when, say, you get a coworker to clock you in or out for the day, usually to hide being late or absent.
Ah, okay, got it. So a little workplace conspiracy.
Yeah.
But still, how big of a deal can that really be?
Well, the document states that a whopping 75% of companies lose money because of it. That's a whole lot of buddy punching going on.
Wow, I had no idea it was that prevalent. But it's just lost time, right? Or is there more to it?
That's just the tip of the iceberg. The document focuses on how easily this buddy system can be exploited for more nefarious purposes.
Like someone using their buddy to gain access to stuff they shouldn't?
Precisely. They point out that a shocking 25% of internal data theft happens because someone got their hands on a colleague's login credentials.
Okay, now that's seriously scary stuff. So we've established passwords, not great. But what's the alternative?
Well, the document points to a solution that's becoming increasingly popular. Multi-factor authentication, or MFA for short.
Right, like when you log into your bank
Yeah.
and they send a code to your phone, it's that extra layer of verification.
Exactly. The document actually boasts that MFA is 99.9% effective against those automated attacks that try to crack passwords.
99.9%. That's got to be almost bulletproof, right? So what's the catch?
Well, as good as MFA is, it's not without its drawbacks. The document itself acknowledges some of these limitations.
Oh, there are always limitations. Hit me with them. What's the downside here?
One, it often relies on those external devices we talked about, like your phone, which is great until
You forget it at home, the battery dies, you drop it in the toilet.
Exactly. Or worse, it gets lost or stolen, and then it becomes a potential entry point for hackers.
Okay, good points. But besides the whole device dependency, there's also the human factor to consider, right?
Ah, yes, the human element, always unpredictable.
Because, let's be honest, even if the technology is super secure, humans are often the weakest link. What does the document say about that?
They actually talk about this thing called security fatigue. Like having to juggle multiple passwords and constantly authenticate, it gets old fast, people start getting sloppy or they find workarounds.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like the more hoops you make people jump through, the more likely they are to find a shortcut. Makes sense.
Exactly. And the document even suggests that all this extra security can actually backfire, leading to decreased productivity and even more frustration.
Which, let's face it, nobody needs more of that in their workday. So if passwords are out and even MFA has its downsides, what's the magic solution? What are they proposing in this document?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. They're basically pitching voice biometrics as the next big thing in authentication.
Voice biometrics, huh? Okay, I'll be honest, that makes me think of those spy movies where they analyze someone's voice to, like, unlock a vault or something.
Well, it's not that far off, actually. Maybe not so much vaults, but the underlying tech, yeah, it's similar. The document actually explains it in pretty simple terms.
Okay, so break it down for me. How does it actually work?
Basically, they're combining voice recognition with real-time transcription.
So, like, it figures out who you are by how you speak?
Exactly. It's like a fingerprint, but for your voice. Every voice has these unique characteristics, you know? But here's the clever bit. They don't just stop at recognizing your voice. They add in real-time transcription to analyze what you're saying, too.
Ah, okay. So it's not enough to just play back a recording of someone's voice.
Right. It's not just looking for a specific phrase or anything. It's analyzing the entire thing you're saying in real time to make sure it's legit.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. So how would this work in practice, say, for logging into your computer at work?
So their system is called Identia two-factor authentication, and they break it down into two main stages: enrollment and authentication.
Enrollment, so like setting it up, creating your profile.
Yeah, exactly. You basically create your own unique voice print. They mention a few different ways to do this, like you might have to read a specific text, or they could even use pre-recorded audio samples of your voice.
Okay, and then when you want to log in, it compares your voice to that stored profile.
Exactly. And get this. They're claiming a 99.9% accuracy rate with their voice biometrics. Plus, they got all those anti-spoofing measures we talked about baked right in.
Okay, so not only is it potentially more secure, but it could be more convenient too, right? No more scrambling for your phone every time you need to log in.
Right. And the document doesn't stop there. They go on to list a whole bunch of other benefits: reduced costs, easier IT management. They even say it can help deter fraud.
Okay, now this all sounds a little too good to be true. It is a promotional document. After all, their job is to sell us on this.
You're absolutely right. We got to keep our skeptical hats on.
So what are they not telling us? What are the potential drawbacks here?
Well, for one thing, that 99.9% accuracy rate. Sure, it sounds great in theory, but what about in the real world? What happens if someone has a cold or a sore throat? Will it still recognize their voice then?
Ooh, good point. I know my voice sounds totally different when I'm sick.
Right. And what about accents? Do they factor that in? These are all things the document doesn't really address. And then, of course, there's the big elephant in the room: privacy.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Because that feels like a whole other can of worms.
Right. We're talking about companies potentially storing our voice prints. What kind of safeguards are in place to prevent misuse? What happens if that data gets breached?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking too. It feels a lot more personal than just handing over your email address. You know, giving them a voice print. It's like giving them a piece of you.
It really is. And that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of privacy concerns. Like, what about those big data breaches we hear about all the time? What happens if someone gets their hands on a database full of voice prints? Could they use that to impersonate people? The document kind of glosses over those risks.
Yeah, that's a little unsettling to think about. So it seems like we're in this weird in-between space with this technology. It has the potential to be more secure, maybe even make our lives a bit easier. But then there's this trade-off. How much privacy are we willing to give up for that convenience and security?
Exactly. And those are the conversations we need to be having now before this technology becomes even more widespread. We need to be pushing for transparency from companies like Recordia. What kind of safeguards do they have in place? How are they addressing these privacy concerns? These are all questions they need to answer.
Right, because it's easy to get caught up in the, ooh, shiny new tech
Yeah.
aspect of it all. But it's important to take a step back and think about the bigger picture, the long-term implications. So for our listeners who might be feeling a little overwhelmed right now, let's do a quick recap of what we've learned about this whole voice biometrics thing.
Sure. We started with the problem. Passwords are outdated and vulnerable. And even multi-factor authentication, while it adds an extra layer of security, it has its downsides. It can be a hassle. It relies on external devices.
Right, and then Recordia swoops in with their solution, voice biometrics. They're basically saying your voice is your password. And on the surface, it has some appealing advantages. It could be more secure, more convenient, even more cost-effective for businesses.
But as with anything, there are always those yeah, but questions. Like, how well does it actually work in the real world? What about things like background noise, accents, or even just having a cold? And then, of course, the big one, privacy.
Yeah, the privacy concerns are definitely something to take seriously. What happens to our voice prints? Are they stored securely? Who has access to them? These are all things to consider.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good takeaway for any new technology, really. Enthusiasm is great, but it's important to balance that with a healthy dose of skepticism and critical thinking.
Well said. So, to our listeners, we want to hear from you. Would you feel comfortable using voice biometrics? Knowing what we know now, would you trust a company with your voice print?
Something to think about. And if you're interested in learning more about Recordia's take on all of this, they do mention their website in the document, recordia.net.
There you have it, folks. Some food for thought as we all navigate this brave new world of technology. As always, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe out there.